The space station Orion 7 floated in the void, its silver hull reflecting the distant light of a dying star. Inside, alarms blared. Crew members ran through the corridors, shouting warnings into their communicators. Something was wrong. Something unnatural had arrived. Syra stood in the center of the containment chamber, her body wrapped in a shimmering cloak that seemed to shift between deep blue and silver. Her hands trembled at her sides, though whether from fear or something else, she didn't know. Around her, the air was still, too still. The walls of the chamber, once lined with instruments and displays, were now covered in a thick layer of frost. The glass panels separating her from the observers were fogged over, but she could still see the shapes of figures beyond, watching her with a mixture of horror and fascination. A body lay at her feet, a auxiliary scientist, his 4 arms frozen solid, his wide black eyes locked in a final expression of terror. He had barely touched her, just a brush of his fingers against her arm, and in an instant, he had turned to ice. The moment played over and over in her mind. His scream cut short, the way his body had cracked apart as it hit the ground, the silence that followed. The door to the chamber hissed open, and Captain Daniel Carter stepped inside. He moved with careful precision, his boots crunching against the ice forming on the floor. The rest of the crew had refused to enter. He understood why. 7 people had already died. 7 intelligent beings, each from different species, each reduced to nothing but frozen statues. And yet, standing just a few feet away, Syra was untouched, her breath still misting the air. His voice was calm, but firm. "Syra, can you hear me?" She raised her head slowly. Her eyes were a pale silver, almost glowing, but there was something deeper in them. Regret. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "I can't stop it." Carter glanced at the body on the floor. He had seen many things in his years of service, but this was different. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a disease. It was her, something inside her, something beyond their understanding. He took a slow step forward. The ice at his feet thickened. The air grew colder, but he didn't stop. The voices in his earpiece crackled to life. The station commander, his voice tense. "Carter, get out of there. Now." He ignored the order. Another step, then another. Syra's hands clenched into fists. "You'll die." But he didn't. She watched as he closed the distance, stepping within arm's reach. Her breath caught. Every other living thing had frozen instantly the moment they touched her presence. Even without contact, they had felt the cold seep into their bones. Yet Carter stood there, unfazed. He wasn't shivering. He wasn't turning to ice. He was fine. Slowly, carefully, he reached out. The voices in his earpiece were shouting now, warning him, begging him to retreat. But then her fingers brushed his palm, a whisper of contact, nothing more. The ice on the floor crackled, spreading outward like veins of glass. The temperature plummeted. The lights flickered. Carter braced himself. And then, nothing happened. He exhaled, his breath forming a soft cloud in the freezing air. His skin remained warm. His body, unharmed. Syra's eyes widened. The silver glow in them flickered, like a dying ember. She whispered. "You're still here." Carter stared at their hands, still touching. For the first time since her arrival, Syra was not alone. The station was in chaos. Scientists, officers, and medical personnel crowded around the observation windows, staring at the live feed from the quarantine chamber. The tension in the air was thick, the fear almost suffocating. No one spoke. No one moved. They had all witnessed what should have been impossible. Captain Daniel Carter had touched the frozen woman. And yet, he still lived. Inside the chamber, Carter didn't move his hand away. His fingers were still pressed against Syra's palm. Her skin was ice cold, but not unbearable. He had expected pain, frostbite, maybe even death. But instead, there was just cold, nothing more. Syra pulled her hand back suddenly, as if she couldn't believe what had just happened. She stared at him, her silver eyes flickering with something between shock and confusion. "You're not freezing," she whispered, as if saying it out loud would make it untrue. Carter flexed his fingers. He felt normal. No numbness, no stiffness, just the lingering chill where her skin had touched his. "I guess I'm not," he said. The station commander's voice crackled through the speakers. "Captain, get out of there." "That's an order." Carter ignored him. He was too focused on the woman in front of him. He could see her chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. Her body trembled, but it wasn't from the cold. It was from fear. "I don't understand," she said. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. "Everyone else." She looked down at the frozen body of the scientist, still lying on the floor. She took a shaky step back. "Everyone else died." Carter glanced at the corpse, then back at her. "But I didn't," he said. "Why?" She shook her head. "I don't know." Behind the glass, the medical team was running frantic scans. The readings were impossible to decipher. Her body temperature was below freezing. Her metabolism almost non-existent. And yet, she was alive. More than that, she was a walking catastrophe. The ice on the walls of the chamber was spreading, forming intricate patterns like frost creeping across a window. The scientists murmured among themselves, some arguing that she should be contained, others insisting she needed to be eliminated before she caused more deaths. Then one voice cut through the chatter. A cold, commanding voice. "She's a danger," said Dr. Elric Varian, the station's chief researcher. He was a tall, gaunt man with sharp features and piercing green eyes. "We need to put her down before she freezes this entire station." Carter turned his head sharply toward the observation window. "Are you kidding me?" "She's already killed 7 people," Varian said, his tone unyielding. "How many more do you want to risk?" "She didn't mean to kill them," Carter shot back. "She didn't even know she was doing it." Varian's expression didn't change. "Doesn't matter. Intentions won't bring those people back." The silence that followed was suffocating. Syra lowered her gaze. She had heard every word. The weight of it pressed down on her like ice forming over a lake, slow and inevitable. Carter clenched his jaw. He didn't like Varian. Never had. The man saw life as numbers on a screen, equations to be solved, problems to be eliminated. But this wasn't a problem. This was a person. He turned back to Syra. "Why are you here?" he asked. "Why come to a human station?" She hesitated. Then, very softly, she said, "I needed help." Carter studied her, waiting for more. But she just hugged herself, as if she were cold, as if she could even feel the cold. "Help with what?" he pressed. Syra's silver eyes flickered to his. There was something dark behind them. "They're coming," she whispered. A chill ran down Carter's spine, and for the first time since stepping into that chamber, it had nothing to do with the cold. "Who?" She swallowed hard. "The ones who made me." Behind the glass, the scientists' monitors flickered, static washing over the screens. Warning lights blinked to life across the control panel. The station's AI issued a monotone alert. "Unidentified energy signature detected. Origin unknown." Carter's communicator buzzed. A frantic voice from the command deck came through. "Captain, we've got a situation. A ship just appeared at the edge of the system. No known design. It's just sitting there." Syra took another step back, her eyes wide with dread. "It's them," she whispered. The ice on the walls cracked and spread. Carter exhaled sharply. He had a very, very bad feeling about this. The station was no longer silent. The hum of alarm sirens pulsed through the corridors, casting a red glow over the control panels as the crew scrambled to assess the situation. The unidentified ship remained motionless in the void, its silhouette barely visible against the endless black of space. It hadn't fired any weapons. It hadn't broadcast any messages. It simply existed, a silent predator waiting for its prey to move. Inside the quarantine chamber, Syra stood frozen, her expression locked between fear and resignation. She had known this moment would come, but she had hoped, desperately, foolishly, that she would have more time. Carter kept his eyes on her. He could feel the weight of her fear pressing against the cold air between them. Whatever that ship was, whoever was on board, she knew them, and she was terrified. "Tell me what's coming," Carter said, his voice low but firm. Syra shook her head. "You wouldn't believe me." "Try me." She hesitated, then took a slow breath. Her voice was quiet, but her words carried the weight of something ancient. "They call themselves the Frostborn." The name sent an involuntary shiver through Carter's spine. "They are my creators," she continued, "but I was never meant to leave them." Her fingers trembled at her sides. The ice creeping along the walls pulsed as if responding to her emotions. "They do not conquer planets like other species do. They do not destroy life." She met Carter's gaze, her silver eyes filled with something deeper than fear. "They consume it." Carter frowned. "Consume." Syra's throat tightened. "They don't just freeze people, Captain. They absorb them. Every frozen body, every planet turned to ice. It feeds them. It makes them stronger." The words hung in the air, unreal, yet Carter could see the truth in her face. She wasn't lying. The communicator in his ear crackled. "Captain Carter, we have a problem," said Lieutenant Rena, her voice sharp with urgency. "That ship, something's happening." Carter pressed his earpiece. What kind of something? Static filled the line for a brief second. Then Rena's voice returned, shakier this time. "It's growing." Carter blinked. "Say that again." "The ship," she repeated. "It's expanding. The metal is spreading outward, like ice forming on glass." A pause. "Sir, I think it's alive." Syra flinched at those words. Her breath quickened. Carter turned back to her. "How do we stop it?" Syra squeezed her eyes shut. "You can't. That's not good enough." "I mean it." She exhaled shakily. "You can't fight them like normal enemies. Their ships, their bodies, their entire existence is built around one purpose: to spread, to devour, to make this entire sector a frozen wasteland where no life can exist." Carter ran a hand through his short brown hair, frustration creeping into his expression. He didn't do hopeless fights. He didn't believe in no-win scenarios. There was always a way. "What about you?" he asked. "You're one of them, right? That means you have to have some kind of control over it." Syra shook her head. "No. I was made to be a weapon, but I wasn't like the others. Something inside me changed. That's why I ran." She looked down at her hands. "I should be dead. I shouldn't have been able to leave them. But something in me resisted their call. I don't know why. I don't know how." Carter narrowed his eyes. That wasn't nothing. If she had resisted them before, that meant there was something different about her. Something that the Frostborn didn't account for. The station rumbled beneath his feet. Carter's communicator flared to life with a burst of static. "Sir, something's happening on the outer hull. Ice is forming. Fast. We're losing structural integrity on multiple decks." Carter turned toward the observation window. Beyond the thick glass, he could see frost creeping along the outer walls of the station, forming jagged crystals that stretched out like frozen veins. The Frostborn weren't waiting anymore. They were here. Carter made a decision. "Open the chamber." The scientists and security officers immediately protested through the speakers. "Captain, that's insane. She's too dangerous. You're going to get yourself killed." Carter ignored them all. "Open it," he repeated, his voice like iron. There was a long, tense pause. Then, with a reluctant hiss, the security locks released. The doors slid open. The cold that rolled out should have been unbearable, but Carter didn't flinch. He stepped inside fully, standing just a foot away from Syra. She looked at him, confused. "What are you doing?" He didn't hesitate. "We're getting out of here." Syra's eyes widened. "You'd help me?" "Damn right I would." For the first time, she looked at him like he was something impossible. A human, standing in the heart of the freezing void. Unaffected, unbroken, something different, something stronger. Outside, the ice continued to spread, claiming the station deck by deck. Time was running out. The ice spread like a living thing, slithering through the metal corridors of Orion 7, sealing doors, freezing control panels, creeping toward the heart of the station. The Frostborn ship remained motionless in space, but its influence was everywhere. The crew scrambled to fight back. Heating units were pushed to their limits. Emergency lockdowns were activated, but nothing stopped the cold. In the quarantine chamber, Carter and Syra stood facing each other, the open door between them an unspoken challenge. The frost-coated walls pulsed as if sensing the change, as if the entire station was holding its breath. "We need to move," Carter said, keeping his voice steady. Syra hesitated, her silver eyes flickering with uncertainty. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," he admitted, "but I'd rather take my chances than wait here to be frozen alive." Syra clenched her fists. "You don't understand. They're already inside." Carter stiffened. "Inside." She nodded. "The ship doesn't need to dock. It doesn't need weapons. The ice is them. Once it spreads far enough, they'll emerge from it." A shiver crawled up Carter's spine. He had faced wars, monsters, hostile alien races. But this was something else. "We go now," he said, leaving no room for argument. For a moment, Syra looked as if she might refuse. Then she stepped forward. The ice at her feet pulsed like it was alive, but as soon as she moved, it hesitated, as if uncertain whether to follow. Carter took the lead, motioning for her to stay close as they moved through the station. The corridors were eerily silent, except for the occasional creak, as the frozen metal strained under the pressure. Some sections were already completely sealed in ice, the bodies of unfortunate crew members frozen in place, their faces locked in expressions of terror. Syra avoided looking at them. Carter forced himself to keep moving. His communicator crackled. "Captain. Carter, do you copy?" It was Rena, her voice strained but alive. "I'm here," Carter responded. "What's your status?" "We've sealed ourselves on the bridge, but we lost 3 more people to the ice. It's not just spreading anymore. It's moving." A pause. "Captain, I saw something inside the ice. A shape. A face." Carter's grip on his rifle tightened. "Hold position. We're on our way." Syra's breath hitched. "You don't understand. The bridge isn't safe." Carter frowned. "Why?" She swallowed hard. "That's where they'll break through first." As if on cue, the station shook. A deep, unnatural groan echoed through the metal, followed by the sound of cracking ice. Syra grabbed Carter's arm. "We need to get off this station. Now." Carter's mind raced. The nearest hangar bay was Deck 12. If they could reach a ship, they might have a chance. This way. He pulled her into a side corridor, taking the shortcut through the engineering sector. The walls were lined with coolant pipes, now covered in a thin sheen of frost. The ice wasn't as thick here yet, but it was growing. Then he heard it, a faint crunch behind them. Carter stopped. His breath misted in the air. Slowly, carefully, he turned his head. A figure stood in the corridor behind them. At first, it looked like one of the frozen crew, until it moved. The ice around it cracked, slivers of frozen flesh shifting unnaturally. Its eyes were hollow voids, its limbs jagged where the frost had consumed its body. It opened its mouth, but no breath escaped. Only a whispering, brittle sound, like wind moving through dead trees. Syra tensed. "It's one of them." Carter raised his weapon. The frozen thing lunged. Carter fired. The plasma shot slammed into its chest, but instead of falling, the creature merely shuddered. The ice covering its body absorbed the heat, cracks forming along its limbs before sealing back up instantly. Syra grabbed his arm. "Plasma won't work." Carter didn't hesitate. He switched to explosives. Pulling a compact thermal charge from his belt, He tossed it directly at the creature's feet. The blast ripped through the corridor, heat roaring outward in a wave of fire. The frozen walls melted instantly, steam hissing as metal was exposed. For a moment, Carter thought it had worked. Then, through the smoke, the thing emerged. Its body was partially melted, but it kept moving. Limbs were forming as the ice began regrowing itself. Carter cursed. Syra stepped forward. The air around her plunged in temperature. The ice along the walls shuddered, as if caught between two opposing forces. Then Syra raised her hand. The creature froze mid-step, not just physically, but entirely, like time itself had locked around it. The ice stopped reforming. Carter watched in stunned silence. Syra's silver eyes burned brighter. The frozen creature cracked. Tiny fissures raced along its surface, spreading like veins of glass. Then, with a soft, almost delicate sound, it shattered. Carter exhaled. Okay, that was new. Syra staggered slightly. The effort had drained her, but she steadied herself. It won't stay down if we don't leave now. Carter didn't argue. He pulled her forward. They reached Deck 12 moments later. The hangar bay loomed ahead, their escape. But as they stepped through the final security doors, they stopped cold. The main launch deck was gone, not destroyed, consumed. A thick wall of ice had sealed the entire hangar shut, the ship's inside completely encased in frozen crystal. There was no way out. Carter clenched his jaw. Damn it. Syra's hands trembled. The station rumbled again, the ice shifting as something stirred beneath it. She turned to Carter, her expression unreadable. There's only one way left. Carter met her gaze. What way? Syra hesitated. Then, very softly, she said, "You have to trust me." The station shook violently, and the ice began to break open. The hangar bay trembled as the ice covering the walls shifted. Cracks formed in the thick frozen mass, stretching outward like veins, revealing something moving beneath. The station's metal structure groaned under the pressure, and a deep, hollow sound filled the air. Not mechanical, not natural. Something was about to break through. Carter's grip on his rifle tightened. He had seen many enemies before, but none like this. The Frostborn weren't soldiers. They weren't invaders in the usual sense. They were a force of nature, a creeping extinction. And now they were here. Syra stood beside him, her silver eyes locked onto the shifting ice. Her breathing was slow, controlled, but Carter could see the tension in her posture, the slight tremble in her hands. "You said there's another way out," Carter said, forcing himself to focus. "What is it?" Syra hesitated. I can feel them. They know I'm here." "That's not an answer." She swallowed. "They think I belong to them. If I open a path, I might be able to keep them from stopping us." Carter's stomach twisted. "Might." Syra met his gaze. "They won't attack me, but they will attack you." The ice split open. A jagged crack ran across the hangar bay floor, and from beneath the frozen surface, something began to rise. At first, it looked like an extension of the ice itself, tall, sharp, inhuman. But as it pulled itself free, Carter saw its true form. A towering figure, humanoid only in the vaguest sense, its body composed of shifting ice and black void, its face featureless except for two hollow, pulsing blue lights where eyes should have been. It stepped forward, the frozen floor cracking beneath its weight. Then another form rose beside it, and another. They were no longer alone. Syra's breath caught. The Frostborn Knights. Carter took a step back. "Tell me they're not as bad as they look." "They're worse." The largest of the creatures tilted its head toward Syra. When it spoke, its voice was wrong. A layered, whispering sound, as if 1,000 frozen voices had been compressed into one. "Syra." Carter felt the air grow colder. Syra clenched her fists. "I am not one of you anymore." The creature took another step. The temperature in the hangar plummeted. The walls of ice crept closer. "You were made from the cold." Syra shuddered. "I left. The Frostborn knight tilted its head. There is no leaving. The ice lunged. Without warning, the frozen mass surged forward like living water, tendrils of ice snapping toward Carter. He barely dodged, rolling to the side as a spike of frost slammed into the ground where he had stood a moment ago. He fired his rifle. Direct hit to the knight's chest, but the plasma bolts merely vanished into the ice, absorbed without effect. Syra moved in front of him. The air around her shifted. The cold wavered, no longer absolute. The tendrils of ice hesitated before reaching her, the frozen walls shuddering in confusion. The knight regarded her, its pulsing blue eyes dimming slightly. "You resist." Syra's breath came in short bursts. "I will not let you take him." There was a pause. Then the knight's head turned toward Carter. "He is not of the cold." Carter exhaled sharply. "Yeah, no kidding. Yet he does not freeze." The knight took a step closer, as if studying him. "Why?" Syra's eyes widened slightly. The same question had haunted her since she first met Carter. Why had he been the only one untouched by her freezing touch? She had always believed the cold took everything, but not him. The knight tilted its head again. "What are you, human?" Carter smirked despite the situation. "Just a guy trying not to die." The Frostborn did not laugh. Then, without warning, the ice lashed out again, but not at Carter. It went for Syra. She gasped as the frozen tendrils wrapped around her arms, her legs, her throat. Not attacking, but pulling. The Frostborn were reclaiming their creation. Carter didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. The moment their skin touched, the ice stopped spreading. The entire hangar shuddered. The Frostborn knight recoiled slightly. The other frozen figures froze in place, as if sensing something unnatural in what had just happened. Syra's silver eyes widened in realization. "It's you," she whispered. Carter frowned. "What?" She turned to face him, something new in her gaze, understanding. "The Frostborn consume heat, consume life. But when they touch you," she shook her head, struggling to find the right words. "It's like they hit a wall. They can't take anything from you." Carter's mind reeled. That wasn't possible. And yet, here they were. The knight studied him again. "You are incompatible." Carter raised an eyebrow. "I've been called worse." The ice around Syra weakened. The frozen tendrils released their grip ever so slightly. She turned back to Carter. "You're not just immune to the cold. You're its opposite." Carter grinned. "So what you're saying is, I melt things." Syra rolled her eyes. "I'm saying you disrupt their hold. The Frostborn spread by taking. But if they can't take anything from you, then maybe." Carter caught on. "Maybe I can stop them from spreading." The knight's blue eyes pulsed brighter. "You are an aberration." The other Frostborn began to move again, but this time there was a hesitation in their steps. Carter and Syra had done something they did not expect. Carter tightened his grip on Syra's wrist. "You said there was another way out." Syra nodded. "If I push my limits, I can break the hangar ice just long enough for us to reach a ship." Carter didn't hesitate. "Then do it." She closed her eyes. The air shifted again, but this time Carter felt something new. The cold around them fought back, resisting her. But with Carter holding onto her, her strength amplified. The ice on the hangar walls shuddered. The knight reacted instantly, lunging forward to stop her. Carter moved first. He grabbed the knight's arm. The moment he touched it, the ice cracked violently, steam rising where his warmth disrupted its structure. The knight staggered back, for the first time in its existence, feeling something it did not understand. Carter grinned. "Yeah, that's right. Not so invincible now, huh?" Syra took her chance. She unleashed everything. A pulse of freezing energy shattered the ice blocking the ships, and Carter dragged her forward as the Frostborn howled in frustration. They sprinted to the nearest escape vessel. The moment they were inside, Carter hit the launch sequence. The ship roared to life, its thrusters melting what little ice remained on the hull. As they shot into space, Carter risked a final glance at Orion 7. The Frostborn were still there, their hollow eyes watching as their prey escaped. But now, they weren't just watching Syra. They were watching him. The ship shot through the void of space, leaving Orion 7 behind, its frozen hulls now completely overtaken by the Frostborn. Carter kept his hands tight on the controls, his pulse still pounding from the last few minutes. The Frostborn weren't just an enemy. They were something else, something that shouldn't exist, a force that consumed, controlled, and spread like a living extinction. And now, they were watching him. Syra sat in the co-pilot's seat, her breath coming in slow, steadying gulps. She had pushed herself to the limit back there. Carter could see the exhaustion in her posture, the way she clutched her arms, as if bracing against an unseen force. "You okay?" he asked, eyes flicking toward her. Syra hesitated, then nodded. "I will be." But her voice lacked certainty. Carter exhaled and turned back to the controls. "We need to get as far away as possible before they decide to come after us." Syra's hands tightened into fists. "They will come after us." Carter didn't doubt that. The Frostborn were relentless, and now that they had seen something they didn't understand, his resistance to their touch, they wouldn't just let them go. He glanced at the navigation system. "Nearest habitable station is Vega Outpost. We can make it in a few hours if we don't run into." The ship's proximity alarms blared. Carter's stomach dropped. He yanked the controls, spinning the ship into a sharp dive just as something massive dropped out of FTL directly in front of them. It was a Frostborn vessel, but it wasn't just a ship. It was a moving storm, a structure made of ice and dark matter, shifting and pulsing as if alive. The hull wasn't metal, but pure frozen mass, jagged and unnatural. It stretched wide like an open maw, as if waiting to consume them. Carter cursed. "They were waiting for us." Syra's expression darkened. "No, they followed me." The ship lurched violently. The Frostborn vessel wasn't using conventional weapons. Instead, tendrils of frost snaked through the void, reaching toward them like grasping fingers. The temperature inside their own ship plunged instantly. Frost formed along the interior panels, the metal creaking under the sudden pressure of extreme cold. Syra gasped, gripping the edges of her seat. "They're trying to pull us in." Carter's instincts screamed at him to fight. But against what? Plasma weapons were useless. Explosives did nothing. The Frostborn didn't operate like normal enemies. They didn't attack. They claimed. The tendrils of frost latched onto the ship's hull, spreading like a virus. The engines stuttered as their fuel lines froze solid. Carter's fingers flew over the control panel. "Damn it, they're cutting our power." Then, without thinking, he touched the ice. The second his skin met the frost, something unexpected happened. The ice shuddered. It wasn't breaking. It was recoiling, like a living thing that had just been burned. Carter didn't understand it, but he didn't need to. He pressed his hand harder against the frozen surface of the cockpit controls. The ice melted away under his palm, steam rising where the Frostborn's influence failed to take hold. Syra's eyes widened. "It's you. You're the only one who can fight back." Carter gritted his teeth. "Then let's see how much damage I can do." He unbuckled his harness and rushed toward the rear of the ship, where the Frostborn tendrils had lashed on the hardest. The cargo bay was already half frozen, ice creeping along the floor, covering the walls, trying to consume everything. Without hesitation, Carter grabbed the frozen metal with both hands. The reaction was instantaneous. The ice shattered. The creeping frost that had been claiming their ship vanished, retreating as if afraid. The tendrils lost their grip, breaking apart into floating shards of frozen mist. The entire ship lurched free, escaping the Frostborn's grasp. Carter fell to his knees, panting. His hands tingled, but he wasn't cold. He had just pushed back against something that had never been stopped before. The Frostborn vessel shuddered in response. Syra helped him up, her silver eyes burning with realization. "You're not just resistant to them. You repel them." Carter coughed, still trying to catch his breath. "Yeah. Well, I'd rather not test the limits of that." He stumbled back to the cockpit, slamming his fist onto the thruster controls. The ship roared forward, breaking away at full speed. The Frostborn didn't follow. They simply watched. Syra stared at the view screen. "They're not chasing us." Carter frowned. "Why?" She didn't answer, because she didn't know. As the Frostborn vessel drifted away, the pulsing blue lights in its hollow depths dimmed, as if considering something. Something new. Carter exhaled sharply. "We're not done with them, are we?" Syra shook her head. "No, this was just the beginning." Carter glanced down at his hands, the same hands that had just repelled a force that could freeze entire worlds. The Frostborn had seen him, and now they wouldn't forget. Vega Outpost hung in the dark like a dying ember, its once bright station lights flickering weakly against the vast cold of space. Carter had expected a bustling trade hub, full of ships, people, life. Instead, as he and Syra approached, all they found was silence. "This isn't right," Carter muttered, eyes fixed on the dead-looking station. Syra sat beside him, watching the same unsettling sight. "They've already been here." Carter tensed. He didn't need to ask who they were. The Frostborn. The ship's sensors read minimal life signs on board. Not zero, but close. That was almost worse. It meant something had happened here, something that left only scraps of life behind. Carter exhaled sharply. "You still sure about this?" Syra nodded. "If there are survivors, we need to find them. And," she hesitated, "we need to know how far the Frostborn have spread." Carter clenched his jaw. The Frostborn weren't just spreading. They were learning. And they were learning about him. He guided the ship toward the docking bay, the station's automated systems barely responding. The landing clamps engaged with a sluggish hiss, the airlock lights flickering uncertainly. Syra stood first, weapons ready. Carter smirked. "You got a weapon?" She held up her hands. "I am a weapon." He couldn't argue with that. The airlock groaned open, revealing the darkened corridors of Vega Outpost. The station had once been warm, a hub of trade and travel, full of the hum of energy and life. Now, it was like walking into a tomb. Ice clung to the walls. Not thick, not yet, but growing, creeping. Carter ran a hand along one of the panels. The frost spread under his touch, then suddenly halted, as if repelled by his presence. Syra saw it too. "They left this here." Carter frowned. "Why?" "They had enough time to take everything." Syra didn't answer, because she didn't know. A noise echoed down the corridor. Carter snapped his rifle up, Syra stepping into a defensive stance. It wasn't the whispering cold of the Frostborn. It was something else. Then, movement. A figure stumbled into view, wrapped in layers of frost-covered clothing, shivering violently. A human, barely alive. Syra rushed forward. "He's breathing." Carter knelt beside the man. His skin was pale, too pale, his lips blue, his eyes unfocused. He had the look of someone who had been touched by the cold and somehow survived. The man's lips moved, but no words came out. Carter leaned in. "Hey, you're safe now. Who did this?" The man's cracked lips trembled. Then, a whisper. "They're still here." A hiss of freezing air rushed down the corridor. Carter shot to his feet, rifle aimed at the darkness ahead. Something was coming. Syra pulled the man up. "We need to move. Now." Carter didn't argue. He slung the man's arm over his shoulder, dragging him forward as fast as possible. The lights flickered wildly, casting shadows that moved. No, not shadows. Figures, shapes. The Frostborn were still inside the station, but they weren't attacking. They were waiting. Carter's gut twisted. They knew we'd come. Syra clenched her jaw. No, they knew you would come. Carter cursed under his breath. The Frostborn weren't mindless. They weren't just spreading like a virus. They were setting traps. A sudden blast of cold erupted behind them. Carter turned. A wall of ice was sealing off the corridor. No escape. The Frostborn had cornered them. Carter didn't think. He let go of the freezing man, spun around, and pressed his bare hands against the forming ice. The reaction was instant. The ice shattered outward, steam hissing where his warmth disrupted its unnatural structure. The Frostborn's creeping grasp halted. Carter turned, breath heavy. The Frostborn had been testing him. They had let them reach the station, let them see what they had done. And now, they wanted to see what he could do. Syra's voice was quiet. They're not trying to kill you. Carter swallowed. They're studying me. The air in the corridor shifted. The temperature dropped even lower, an unnatural stillness settling in. And then, a voice. Not from the frozen man, not from Syra, from everywhere. You are not of the cold. Carter's grip on his rifle tightened. Yeah, I got that part already. The Frostborn's voice didn't change. You cannot be taken. You cannot be made. Carter's pulse pounded. What do you want? A long silence. Then, to understand, the Frostborn weren't here to kill him. They were here to learn. Syra stepped forward. If you want answers, we need to leave. Let us go, and we'll tell you what we know. The Frostborn didn't respond. Then the ice began to recede. Not completely, not gone, but enough. The path to the docking bay opened. Carter exhaled, hardly believing it. That actually worked. Syra nodded toward the Frostborn's lingering presence. No, they're not done with us. They hurried back to the ship, dragging the half-frozen survivor with them. The moment the airlock sealed, Carter launched them away from Vega Outpost, his hands gripping the controls with white-knuckled tension. Syra sat beside him, silent for a long moment. Then, they're not chasing us. Carter glanced at the sensors. She was right. The Frostborn weren't following. They had let them go. And that was far more terrifying than if they had attacked, because it meant the Frostborn weren't just an enemy. They were watching, learning, waiting. Carter looked down at his hands, hands that had repelled the cold, had broken their control. And in the silence of deep space, he realized something chilling. The Frostborn weren't just studying him. They were trying to decide what to do with him. And whatever they decided, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot.